please join me in welcoming Professor Guy Standing.
Well, thank you very much. I've just come from an incredible invitation to speak on a related subject in the V&A Museum. I've never thought I'd be invited to speak there. The V&A is one of the great cultural institutions, the cultural commons of our country. And this college shares that distinction as being a great cultural institution standing for the public education. So I feel a sense of humility to come here and speak to you this evening. It's a part of public exchanges that should be far more common than they are. Now, I want to talk about a subject which has been preoccupying me for the whole of my professional life since I left Cambridge back in, I won't go in when I left, but it's something that I've been advocating the whole of that period. And I worked in the United Nations for many years and have a lot of scars to show for that. I've worked in Ukraine, and the current government had asked me to prepare a plan if there was ever peace. And then suddenly I was asked by the Palestinians last year to work in Ramallah that if there was ever a two-state solution, an emergency basic income would be part of the peace dividend. I sadly think it'll never happen, but I wish it would. And it's something that's taken me all over the world. And I want to make the case this evening that fundamentally it's an ethical issue. The justification for having a basic income is ethical, not instrumental. It's not a policy just for dealing with poverty, for example. It's a philosophically grounded policy. And I want to describe first the concept and then go through the ethical justifications, because what has happened in the last few months is nothing less than an economics revolution that we're experiencing at the hand of, quite honestly, a frightening phenomenon in the United States. And it's added a sort of imperative, and I'll come back to that later in my talk. Let me first of all describe what I mean by a basic income. The definition is that every individual, every man, every woman, every child should receive a modest amount individually in a form like cash that they can do what they like with the money. It would be paid regardless of marital status, household status, or gender, or age, or the smaller amount paid for children, paid through the mother or the surrogate mother. It would be unconditional in behavioral terms. It's your right. It would be a modest amount. I never use the term unconditional and universal. It's unconditional, but it's not necessarily universal. And the reason I don't use the term universal is that for pragmatic reasons, you would have to say it's for your citizens, your usual residents, legal residents in the country, because otherwise you would be open to flooded people coming for what's called welfare tourism, and it would make it politically impossible for us to get people to support it. That's the only reason. In an ideal world, if I was a philosopher king, I'd like everybody in the world to have a basic income, but for practical purposes, that would be, I don't use the term universal. It's also a matter of saying that the important thing is to be moving in the direction of a basic income. I'm often asked, how much would you pay? I'm sure one of you will ask me that. My answer to that is there is no ideal amount, but the important thing is to be moving in the direction of people having a sense of a basic income as a right. Now, you would have to have supplements for people with disabilities because they have extra costs of living. The important thing is to be giving everybody an equal anchor, an equal base. And therefore, those people who have extra costs to meet would be receiving extra. Now, the discussion of basic income is given extra poignancy at the moment because of the latest incredible decisions on disability benefits by this government, which I find truly shocking. And maybe I don't want to drive some of you out, but I was an economic advisor to John McDonnell, who's a friend of mine, and he's stood up and he's opposed what's just been done. I worked with John for 3 years, and I think I converted a number of his colleagues, including Jeremy Corbyn, and I enjoyed that period. So what we're seeing now upsets me quite a lot. Now, I'm going to go through the 3 ethical rationales. The first one is that it is a matter of common justice. Common justice in the sense that we allow the private inheritance of private wealth. Why shouldn't we have the public inheritance of public wealth? And it goes back to what I was talking about in the V&A at lunchtime. It goes back in our history to the Charter of the Forest of November the 6th, 1217. A 10-year-old king that morning in what was St. Paul's Cathedral watched as his regent sealed 2 constitutional documents that have existed and defined democracies across the world. One was the Magna Carta, which came into effect then. We're taught at school that it was June 15th in Runnymede, 1215. That's wrong because it was the Charter of Liberties and promptly was torn up. It became the Magna Carta on that day in November 1217, alongside the Charter of the Forest. And the Charter of the Forest said every free man in this country has the right to subsistence in the commons, a right to access estobars, as it was called, a right to access raw materials and be able to define and build their own life. And it should roll back the forests that the monarchy had taken, which weren't actually forests in the sense that we think about it. It meant a forest came from the Latin to mean an open space. And what successive kings had done is they'd take great swathes of land and turn them into hunting grounds and the rest of it. And basically, the commoners said, we will only fight against the invading French in 1216 if you return the land and you return the resources to us commoners. And the result was this wonderful Charter of the Forest. Now, the Charter of the Forest was the most subversive document in our history. Not only did it say that every free man has the right to subsistence and the right to resources, but it also said the monarchy had to act as the steward for the commons. It was incredibly subversive, and it has the distinction of being on the English and British statute books longer than any other piece of legislation in history. It was only repealed by the Conservatives in 1971, which I think you will agree is a long time for a thing to be on the statute books. And it defined it because every single rebellion we've had in our history has been an attempt to recover the commons. The peasants' revolt in 1381, the Kett's Rebellion in 1549, the levellers and the diggers of the mid-1640s, the Luddites in the early 19th century. And it goes all the way through the 19th century with the Chartists and so on, until the ultimate defeat in the form of William Morris. That's why I was talking about this in the V&A, because he is the patron saint of the V&A. And William Morris wanted everybody to have the right to work and the right to exist in the commons. And the communists and the Christian Democrats, one said the state should take it over. The other said the market should take it over. And the debates through the 20th century ignored the commons. But it goes back to that sense of justice, which I think is fundamental. Now, the second form of justice is religious justice. During the pandemic, I'm not religious. I apologize to anybody who is. I'm an atheist. But I got contacted by representatives of the Vatican. And I thought, what the hell is going on? But the Pope wanted to issue a letter, which he eventually did. And the letter includes the wonderful statement, because he's basically come out saying that as a Catholic, he believes in a basic income. And he says, whether we are believers or not, we are agreed today that the earth is essentially a shared inheritance whose fruits are meant to benefit everyone. And I think that a basic income is essentially consistent with that. God, if you believe in God, God has given us unequal talents. You are more cleverer than I. Someone else is less, blah, blah, blah. Okay? And in a sense, a basic income was a compensation to those who don't have the talent to make money or whatever. I can respect that argument. A third argument is intergenerational justice. I gave a talk in Middlesbrough. Don't know if anybody's from Teesside or up there. Gave a talk, and I was taken around the old town and given a tour. Now, what happened in the middle of the 19th century was it was a little hamlet. And then they discovered iron ore. And it became the center of the Industrial Revolution and the empire, that area. And the people who owned the mills had their wealth, and they inherited wealth, and they're living in the south in their big estates today. But the descendants of the workers who produced the steel that made the Industrial Revolution are today in the precariat, the group I write about in other books. And they have a wretched life. So in a sense, a basic income is saying a compensation for intergenerational injustice. And then you get to ecological justice. It's very easy to show, and I cite figures to show it, that most of the pollution, most of the traumas that have caused the ill health to people are caused by pollution done by the wealthy. The wealthy are the polluters of the world. But the poor are the sufferers from the pollution, the cancers and the traumas, etc. So in a sense, it's a matter of an ecological justice, a compensation. Doesn't mean we shouldn't stop the pollution, of course. And then there's an argument of work justice. And this one I want to shove down the throat of Rachel Reeves and Starmer and the others who are talking nonsense at the moment. Because they're talking about people who work should get, and people who don't work should not get, you know. I want to tell them that what work creates more value than all other forms of work in this country. It's unpaid care work, but they don't count that as work. It's a sexist system. So if you spend 40 hours a week looking after your elderly mother, that's zero. If you look after my elderly mother and I pay you, then it contributes to growth and work. But of course, it's the same activity. And the Office of National Statistics, the government's own body, has worked it out that the value of women's unpaid care work is worth more than all manufacturing put together and non-financial services. But it doesn't get counted as work. And for me, a basic income that is a right enables people to make a choice of what type of work they pursue. I may want to spend more time looking after my elderly mother. You may not. But you give people a choice of what type of work to pursue. Now, there are other justice arguments. We don't have time to go on with them. You can look at my book if you're still interested. But the second argument, the second ethical argument, is that a basic income enhances freedom. Every politician says we believe in freedom. We believe in freedom. But do they? Freedom has three forms. The first form is libertarian freedom. What that means is freedom to choose, and freedom to say no, or freedom to say yes. It's a vital freedom. Now, you can't do that. You can't, if you are so poor, you have to do whatever you have to do to survive. You aren't free. You aren't free. And that freedom is very interesting because I was very surprised, after we established our organization, that a very influential right-wing economist who was advising Margaret Thatcher, he actually joined our association because he said, you cannot have a good market economy unless people can make rational choices. And they can't make rational choices unless they have sufficient resources to make that choice. I can respect that argument. The second argument is that it enhances liberal freedom. And what liberal freedom means is the freedom to be moral. The freedom to do something because you believe it is right. And you can't do that if you are so constrained by lack of resources that you just have to do whatever you have to do to survive. And the ultimate, of course, is a woman selling her body because she needs the money. We did an experiment in Africa. And at the end of the 2 years that we did this pilot in a whole lot of villages, I was visiting and I called some young women across. And I said, you've had this basic income now for 2 years. What is the best thing for you? And they giggled and, they were teenagers. They were timid in front of a foreigner and blah, blah, blah. But eventually one of them said, I tell you what, before we had our basic income, when the men came down from the fields with their wages at the end of the month, we had to say yes. Now we say no. That's freedom. That's freedom. And liberal freedom is a very important freedom that is not given the respect by many people who talk about freedom. And the third freedom is what's called Republican freedom. Republican freedom is the ability to, it's called, by John Locke, it was called natural freedom, the freedom that we can act without the assent of somebody else. I don't have to ask your favor before I do it. I'm doing it because I want to do it. And that is a very important thing, particularly, again, for women who don't have to ask. It's not Republican freedom if a woman has to ask her husband or a father or whatever, can I do it? Even if she knows that 99% of the time he'll say, of course, my dear, of course, my dear. Republican freedom is the opinion, I can do it because whatever you think, right? So these three forms of freedom are essentially the case. We did a huge pilot in India, thousands of people. And I went down to some of the villages towards the end of the period we've been giving this basic income. And I realized something that I should have realized earlier. If you're interested, I developed the argument in the books, but it's this: the emancipatory value of basic income is more than the money value. I leave you that as a puzzle, but it is a remarkable feature that we've found. And the third ethical argument, is that a basic income, even if it's a modest amount that would be much less than most of you in this room would regard as a proper basic income, supposing £100 a week, whatever the number, it enhances basic security. Now, basic security is a human need. We all need basic security. Not total security, because that induces bad phenomena, but basic security. And basic security is a public good. A public good has value. If everybody has basic security, the value to every individual is greater than if just a few people have it, because it enhances behavioral reactions that are altruistic and give people a greater sense of security. But basic security is very interesting because the psychologists have taught us, and you don't have to be Einstein to appreciate what I'm about to say. The psychologists have taught us that if you suffer from chronic insecurity, any of you here who's done that in their lives, and I'm sure some of us have, a period where you suffer from insecurity, your mental bandwidth shrinks. Your capacity to be rational, your capacity to be intelligent diminishes. It's well known. So in a sense, if a government allows millions of people, as it is doing today, to be suffering from chronic insecurity, it is unfair to expect them to be making optimal, rational decisions, because the very experience of insecurity diminishes their capacity to do that. And there's a lot of evidence for that. But it goes further than that. Beveridge, when he wrote his famous report that established the welfare state in 1942, his report led to the establishment of most forms of the welfare state. And the welfare state basically was giving labor-based securities. If you had a period of unemployment, you can work out an insurance scheme so that you can get contributions, whether it's from an employer or you or both, work out actuarially the probability of you being unemployed, and then you can work out an insurance system. Same with illness, same with maternity, the various things. But what we've moved into with the globalization period and the restructuring of capitalism that's taken place in the last 50 years is that we have moved away from those forms of labor-based insecurity into a period of chronic uncertainty. Now, for an economist, uncertainty is different from other forms of insecurity. You cannot work out the probability of being hit. You cannot work out the probability of a shock or a hazard hitting you, and you cannot work out the probability of being able to cope with that shock. And what's happened is increasingly we are in a world of chronic uncertainty. And this is explaining why we are having a surge of mental breakdowns, a surge of what's called deaths of despair, a surge of suicides, and rising morbidity. I give a lot of talks to the group that I've written about, the precariat. And the precariat consists of millions and millions of people who are suffering a life of chronic insecurities, without a sense of future, without a sense of belonging to society. Every single day, I promise you, every single day, I receive emails from people saying, I'm part of the precariat. I'm suffering from these things. My life has no purpose. My life is blah, 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 etc. Different stories, different people. But when we have a situation where the precariat is growing and uncertainty is growing, and we need ex ante security. not compensation if something happens, but something that gives you a sense, I've got security. I know tomorrow morning when I wake up, I'll be able to feed myself, feed my child, pay my rent, have dignity. And that's not what we're getting. And when I wrote the book, The Precariat, in 2011, it's gone into 25 languages and takes me all over the place. I wrote on page 1 that unless the insecurities of the precariat are addressed, we will see the emergence of a political monster. In 2016, I got a very strange invitation to go and address the Bilderberg Group. I'm sure you're all sensible people, you don't know who the hell the Bilderberg Group is. But it consists of all the extremely powerful right-wing people from around the world. And they are in the top positions. I initially thought it was a left friend, joking, pulling my leg. So, I didn't take any notice. A couple of days later, I was in the kitchen and got the phone call. Why haven't you responded? We want you to come to Bremen, this castle, and address the Bilderberg. So I checked with all my progressive friends around Europe. They all said, you've got to go. Tell him. So I went, and now imagine, especially those of a certain age here, imagine if I was suddenly talking about this subject, and right sitting where he is sitting was Henry Kissinger. And behind Henry Kissinger was the head of the CIA, and the head over there was MI6, and the head of NATO, and it was crazy, absolutely crazy. And I said, look, this was early 2016. I said, look, do not be surprised if a lot of the precariat who are facing life of insecurity vote for Trump later this year. Do not be surprised if they vote for Brexit, because they're being offered no real alternative. Of course, after November 2016, I got a deluge of emails from all over the place saying your monster has arrived. And that leads to the political imperative that I want to emphasize. Because the precariat at the moment in the world is divided in itself. It's an emerging class. That's why I called it the dangerous class. Because all of them are suffering from insecurities, but the less educated are listening to the Trumps and the Boris Johnsons and the Orbans and the various fascist types around who promise to bring back yesterday. They promise that yesterday was great, MAGA, get rid of Brexit, rest of it. And I had an argument with your favorite prime minister, but not mine, Boris Johnson, who lied to me no end about bringing back, by getting out of Brexit, getting out of the EU. This group listens because nobody is offering them a future of security. So being promised a past, even if it actually is mythical in many respects, is something they can cling on to. We're seeing that now. The second group in the precariat are the nostalgics, the people like migrants who don't have a home. They don't have a present. They don't have a belonging. They won't vote for fascists and populists and so on, but they stay quiet except for days when that's too much. And the third group is the progressives. And this is the young who go to college and university and were promised a future, a career. And they come out, in many respects, knowing they bought a lottery ticket, which doesn't actually offer a future of dignity and work and building commons. This group is the group that says maybe basic income should be part of that future. I believe that if it is not part of a future, we will have a drift back into the terrifying conditions of the 1930s, and worse that will follow. But I believe we can afford it. I've explained how it could be paid. It's very easy to pay for it. I can tell you that. I can answer questions. But we've also now had this experience of over 100 experiments, pilots, around the world. It's very rare that someone has had the good fortune, or whatever it might be, to put into practice what you believe. There are now over 100 experiments in the United States alone. If you had said that to me 10 years ago, I would have said, dream, dream, what have I been drinking? What have I been smoking? But that's what's the case. I just finished being a technical advisor to a pilot in Wales. The government of Wales did it despite government opposition. Mark Drakeford, who was Prime Minister, he is a solid supporter. And he's done it, and all care leavers, all young people who left care homes have been receiving a basic income for 2 years. We've just finished with the analysis. I'm not allowed to tell you the results because it's secret. It's going to come out later in the year. I just want you to watch my mouth for a moment. But we've seen experiments that have resulted improvements in mental health, improvements in physical health, improvements in children schooling and attendance of children in school, improvements in attitudes, people becoming more tolerant of the other. And listen to me what I'm about to say, because often people will walk out and they say the opposite. All the experiments I've seen result in an increase in work, not a decrease. Critics say if you gave people a basic income, they'd all become lazy, they blah, 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 you know. The opposite takes place. And it's because it gives people confidence, energy, a sense of belonging, a sense of dignity, that they actually work more. But they do different types of work. And that is a great outcome, in my view. And finally, I think there's pretty strong evidence, I know there's very strong evidence, that it leads to a better political attitude, more tolerant, more altruistic, more committed to social solidarity. And that is precisely what we need today, unless we're going to go into another dark night. So I hope that we will move in that direction, but it will only happen if we demand it. And that, I think, is where we are today. And I'm proud to say that I think more are coming out. 3 members of this cabinet have told me to my face, maybe 15 times each, I don't know, maybe more, that they believe in it. But when they get in the cabinet, they become little people. Their backbone seems to go. They have difficulty, you know? And I think they are cowardly, and they're going to pay a price for that cowardice. Because actually people are realizing we need these things. We need freedom, we need security, and we need justice. So I hope that we will continue to move. It's been a long road, but I think it's coming. Thank you very much.